Good afternoon. The Subcommittee on the Federal Workforce, Postal Service in the District of Columbia hearing will now come to order. I apologize for the brief delay. We have a lot going on here today. Members will be coming in and leaving periodically. Unfortunately, we seem to schedule everything at the same time here in light of the work that needs to be done. Following the, I want to welcome my friend and ranking member, Mr. Chaffetz from Utah, and members of the subcommittee hearing, witnesses, and all those in attendance. In light of the recent attacks and violent outbursts against federal workers and facilities, I've called today's hearing to examine federal and postal employee workplace security. The chair, ranking member, and the subcommittee members will each have 5 minutes to make opening statements, and all members will have 3 days to submit statements for the record. I'd also like to ask unanimous consent that the testimony of Congressman Benny Thompson, who was our chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security, and that of a DOD employee be submitted for the record. Hearing no objection, so ordered. Ladies and gentlemen, in recent weeks we've witnessed several brutal attacks and violent outbursts against federal workers and facilities, which is why I've called today's hearing. Tragically, in 2010 alone, a U.S. court security officer in Las Vegas and an IRS manager in Austin, Texas, have lost their lives, while several law enforcement personnel, including a deputy U.S. Marshal and members of the Pentagon Force Protection Agency, have been injured in the line of duty. Given the rise of anti-government feeling, as notably reported in the Southern Poverty Law Center's 2009 report entitled The Second Wave, I believe that as chairman of the subcommittee, I have a duty to examine how well positioned federal agencies and the Postal Service are for similar events. Today's hearing will also allow us to discuss what agencies are doing to provide comprehensive training and guidance to employees on how to respond to such threats and scenarios. It's one thing to hear about agencies wrestling with how to afford purchasing expensive security countermeasures, but it's quite a different matter to listen to federal employees recount the lack of emergency preparedness of a particular office. It may be that as an agency, an emergency plan exists, but if the individual workers aren't familiar with it and are not even practicing any type of evacuation drills, then what type of outcome can we expect if and when disaster strikes? An important item to note here is that the federal and postal employees warrant our respect. For some to look at the violence directed against IRS employees and to try to justify that deliberate intent to murder other human beings is simply inexcusable and unacceptable. Our nation's public servants deserve nothing less than our full support, and to know that all of us, from the President to Congress, are grateful for their work and assistance in helping us govern our nation. More importantly, our federal employees need to know that we will do everything possible to keep them safe while they are at the workplace and away from their families. Today's hearing will provide us with the opportunity to hear from the IRS and its employee representatives concerning both the immediate and long-term impact of the February 18th attack in Austin. Additionally, we will hear from the Department of Homeland Security about its ongoing activities in the federal building security area, as well as from the U.S. Postal Service's Inspection Service. It is my hope that the testimony and feedback we receive from today's witnesses will provide the subcommittee with precise guidance and direction. Again, I thank each of you for being with us this afternoon, and I look forward to your participation. Now yield 5 minutes to our ranking member, Mr. Chaffetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this important hearing. I appreciate all of those witnesses that are come to testify today. Needless to say, we want to make sure that every federal employee and the public who is engaging with the federal government at all times is as safe as possible. People should deserve and expect to work in a safe environment. We need to constantly evaluate the standards and procedures, so I think this hearing is particularly appropriate at this time. I look forward to hearing the discussion. And for those very few but important members, or men and women, who have been on the wrong end of this violence, our heart, thoughts, and prayers go out to those people. We need to continue to strive to improve and make the workplace as safe as we can, but also accessible at the same time. So I look forward to this hearing. I thank again the chairman for holding it, and yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. I'd now like to yield 5 minutes to Ms. Eleanor Holmes Norton, the Congresswoman from the District of Columbia, who has also been at the forefront of because of the number of federal facilities in her district, has also been at the forefront of this issue for a long time. Ms. Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I am especially appreciative that you have called this hearing so soon after the attacks in Austin and right here in the National Capital Region. First at the IRS in Austin, and here in this region at the Pentagon. Mr. Chairman, in post 9/11 America, there got to be a renewed appreciation for federal workers, and the kind of hammering of civil servants stopped. They recognized how important was the work of those who are spread across our government. It is very disturbing to see the uptick in attacks on federal employees once again. Mr. Chairman, during the last 10 years or so, the Federal Protective Service was literally drained of employees, and it got so bad that we asked, and the Appropriation Committee mandated that a certain floor of Federal Protective Service guards and officers be retained. There was the notion that all you needed were security guards. You didn't even need a Federal Protective Service, even though that's the oldest of the police forces in the federal government. It was very disconcerting. Mr. Chairman, I chair a subcommittee with jurisdiction over federal construction and leasing, and have some jurisdiction over the Federal Protective Service in that regard. I'm a member of the Homeland Security Committee, and if I may say so, Mr. Chairman, the so-called Interagency Security Committee is something of a joke. This is a committee that's supposed to sit and coordinate security for federal buildings, sites, and employees. But to show you just how ineffective is the protection of federal workers, take a building like the new transportation, not so old, maybe about 5 years old, the new transportation department. That is not a high security building. Mr. Chairman, when my staff with their capital and with their congressional tags on, have gone to that committee, they can't get in there. Somebody in the agency has to stop her work and come down in order for them to enter the premise, even though these people have the credentials of the United States Capitol on them. That's what you have at one end in a building that we do not think Al-Qaeda is much looking for. At the other end, we have more sensible security in some other parts of the government. How could this be? The reason it is this way, Mr. Chairman, is that security gets decided on the premises. No matter what they tell you, it's some GS9 somewhere who sits with a committee and decides who will come to this into this agency or not, and the rest of it. And if it goes up to the secretary, and the secretary said that's fine with me, well, then even staff from the Capitol can't get in. If it's someone who has a more even sense of security and what it means, maybe they will. But I can tell you this, Mr. Chairman, I have seen security in buildings that I think Al-Qaeda would be far more interested in entering that do not have the security of the Transportation Department. And we have had hearings ourselves on it. I would like very much for my subcommittee, for the Homeland Security Committee, and you, Mr. Chairman, to get together so that we can, in a concerted way, make the federal government protect federal employees by having one standard that is minimal and then tailor it to other parts of the government which may require more or less. Again, I very much appreciate the respect you show for the safety of federal employees by holding such a prompt hearing here this afternoon.
Thank you, and we are looking for best practices to be adopted. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Connolly, for 5 minutes.
I thank you, Chairman Lynch, and thanks so much for holding this very important hearing. Over the last year, we've witnessed a rise in violent rhetoric by extremist groups in America. Therefore, we must consider not only those infrastructure improvements to protect federal employees from terrorism, but also the manner in which we may exorcise justification of violence from public discourse. Less than 1 month ago, Andrew Joseph Stack intentionally crashed his small plane into a federal building in Austin, Texas, that included offices of the Internal Revenue Service, filled with federal employees. This terrorist attack killed Vernon Hunter, a 27-year-old federal employee who previously served 2 tours overseas in the armed forces. Incredibly, some political figures offered a tacit defense of that terrorist attack. One such individual was recorded as saying, quote, "I think if we'd abolished the IRS back when I first advocated it, he wouldn't have had a target for his airplane," unquote. Previously, he told the Conservative Political Action Conference that he empathized with the terrorist who flew his plane into the federal building in Austin. This defense of terrorism is remarkable because under this logic, the victims of terrorism bear the responsibility of the terrorist attack. This implicit figure's reprehensible defense of terrorism is consistent with a disturbing trend of violent anti-government extremism we've seen in our country all too often. According to the Southern Poverty Law Center, the slaughter engineered by Timothy McVeigh and Terry Nichols, men steeped in the conspiracy theories and white-hot fury of the American radical right, marked the opening shot in a new kind of domestic political extremism, a revolutionary ideology whose practitioners do not hesitate to carry out attacks directed at entirely innocent victims, people selected essentially at random to make a political point. Since 1995, there have been over 75 violent attacks by domestic terrorists like Timothy McVeigh and Andrew Joseph Stack, including the 1996 bombing at the Atlanta Olympics by anti-abortion fanatic Eric Rudolph and the 2009 murder of a guard at the Holocaust Museum by anti-Semite James von Bohn. It would be reprehensible enough for anyone to endorse violence generally, but even worse is endorsement of violence in response to nonviolent policies with which one might disagree, such as the terrorist attack against the IRS to express tax grievances. Terrorism can never be condoned. Violence against federal workers and installations is never acceptable. Those who, for cheap political pandering, find themselves justifying it most assuredly have the blood of its innocent victims, like Vernon Hunter, on their hands. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. The committee will now hear testimony from today's witnesses. It is the standard policy of this committee that all witnesses who are to offer testimony shall be sworn. Could I ask you to all stand and raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you'll give before this subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Let the record indicate that all the witnesses have each answered in the affirmative. What I'll do is I'll offer a brief introduction of each of our witnesses, and then we will afford each an opportunity to testify for 5 minutes. First of all, Mr. Mark Goldstein is the Director of Physical Infrastructure Issues at the United States Government Accountability Office. Mr. Goldstein is responsible for the Government Accountability Office work in the areas of government property and telecommunications, and has held other public sector positions, serving as Deputy Director and Chief of Staff to the District of Columbia Financial Control Board, and as a senior staff member of the United States Senate Committee on Government Affairs. Mr. Goldstein is also an elected Fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration. Mr. Stephen Miller is Deputy Commissioner for Services and Enforcement, providing direction and oversight for all major decisions affecting the 4 taxpayer-focused Internal Revenue Service divisions: wage and investment, large and mid-sized business, all business, self-employed, and tax-exempt and government entities. He is also responsible for the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, which investigates income tax evasion, the IRS Office of Professional Responsibility, which administers the laws governing the practice of tax professionals before the IRS, and the IRS Whistleblower Office, which receives information on tax cheating. Ms. Sue Armstrong was named the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary in September of 2009 of the Office of Infrastructure Protection, a division of the National Protection and Programs Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security. In this capacity, she supports the Assistant Secretary in leading the coordinated national effort to reduce the risk to the nation's critical infrastructure and key resources posed by acts of terrorism, and increasing the nation's preparedness and rapid recovery in the event of an attack, natural disaster, or other emergency. Mr. Gary W. Schenkel was appointed Director of the Federal Protective Service, a division of the National Protection and Programs Directorate at the Department of Homeland Security in March of 2007. A retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel, Schenkel has significant leadership and experience in a wide range of arenas, including organizational transformation efforts, security planning for public facilities, logistical planning and execution, and business administration. Mr. Guy Cottrell joined the Postal Service in 1987 as a letter carrier in New Orleans, Louisiana in 2008. Mr. Cottrell was asked to come to national headquarters to lend his expertise and leadership to the Chief Postal Inspector's role as Chief Security Officer of the Postal Service as Inspector in charge of the Security and Crime Prevention Communications Group. In 2009, Mr. Cottrell was selected as Deputy Chief Inspector, Headquarters Operations, with oversight of all Postal Service national security programs. Welcome to all of our witnesses. Mr. Goldstein, you're now recognized for 5 minutes. Let me just, I'm sorry, Mr. Gold, let me just explain. That box in the middle of the table will show green while your time is proceeding. It'll show yellow when it's time to wrap up, and then red when you should probably stop offering testimony. But Mr. Goldstein.
I'll take that warning. Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss GAO's recent work on the Federal Protective Service and its efforts to protect federal facilities. Recent events, including last month's attack on Internal Revenue Service offices in Texas and the January 2010 shooting in the lobby of a Nevada federal courthouse, demonstrate the continued vulnerability of federal facilities and the safety of federal employees who occupy them. These events also highlight the continued challenges involved in protecting federal real property and reiterate the importance of the Federal Protective Service's efforts to protect the over 1 million government employees and members of the public who work in and visit the nearly 9,000 federal facilities. This testimony is based on past GAO reports and testimonies and discusses challenges FPS faces in protecting federal facilities and tenants' agencies' perspectives of FPS's services. To perform this work, GAO visited a number of federal facilities, surveyed tenant agencies, analyzed documents, and interviewed officials from federal agencies and contract guard companies. Over the past 5 years, we have reported that FPS faces a number of operational challenges protecting federal facilities, including the following. First, FPS's ability to manage risk across federal facilities and implement security countermeasures is limited. FPS assesses risk and recommends countermeasures to the General Services Administration and their tenant agencies. However, decisions to implement these countermeasures are frequently made by GSA and tenant agencies who have at times been unwilling to fund the countermeasures. Additionally, FPS takes a building-by-building approach to risk management rather than taking a more comprehensive strategic approach and assessing risks among all buildings in GSA's inventory and recommending countermeasure priorities to GSA and tenant agencies. Second, FPS has experienced difficulty ensuring that it has a sufficient staff, and its inspector-based workforce approach raises questions about protection of federal facilities. While FPS is currently operating at its congressionally mandated staffing level of no fewer than 1,200 full-time employees, the agency has experienced difficulty determining its optimal staffing level to protect federal facilities. Additionally, until recently, FPS's staff was steadily declining, and as a result, critical law enforcement services have been reduced or eliminated. Third, FPS does not fully ensure that its contract security guards have the training and certifications required to be deployed to a federal facility. We found that FPS guards had not received adequate training to conduct their responsibilities. Specifically, some guards were not provided building-specific training, such as what actions to take during a building emergency or evacuation. This lack of training may have contributed to several incidents where guards neglected assigned responsibilities. Fourth, GSA has not been satisfied with FPS's performance, and some tenant agencies are unclear on FPS's role in protecting federal facilities. According to GSA, FPS has not been responsive and timely in providing security assessments for new leases. About 1/3 of FPS's customers could not comment on FPS's level of communication on various topics, including security assessments, a response that suggests that the division of roles and responsibilities between FPS and its customer is unclear. Some 82% did not use FPS for primary law enforcement response. FPS is taking steps to better protect federal facilities. For example, FPS is developing a new risk assessment program, and has recently focused on improving oversight of its contract guard program. While GAO is not making any new recommendations in this testimony, we note that FPS has not completed many related corrective actions to our previous reports. We look forward to continued progress from DHS in the near future. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. I'd be happy to answer questions you and the subcommittee may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. Mr. Miller, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Lynch, Ranking Member Chaffetz, and Congresswoman Norton. Thanks for the opportunity to testify on IRS workplace safety and security, particularly in the wake of the senseless attack last month on the IRS building in Austin, Texas, that took the life of Vernon Hunter. We are dedicated to ensuring safety and the well-being of our 100,000 employees, no matter what their job is, nor where they are located. The IRS workforce is our most valuable resource, and no violent act is going to deter us from doing our jobs with dignity and respect for the American public. At the IRS, security is managed by our Office of Physical Security and Emergency Preparedness, which manages at a national level, ensuring we have consistent implementation of security policies and procedures. For 2010, we will spend just over $100 million on security at IRS offices. There are over 700 such facilities. As required under an executive order, we utilize the Interagency Security Committee standards, the ISC standards, to determine what security to provide at a given facility. Depending upon the applicable security level under the standards, we will provide a variety of security tools, including highly visible guards and canines, explosive and intrusion detection systems. We also employ access control systems such as turnstiles, card key access, proximity cards, and lock and key control systems. Physical barriers include bollards, crash fencing, barriers, planters, and pop-up barriers. Screening measures focus on magnetometers, handheld wands, and x-ray machines. We also have a detailed incident reporting system that's available and up and running 24/7, 365 days of the year that reports and tracks on these incidents. Mr. Chairman, the IRS employs a combination of strategies to plan, implement, and evaluate our security processes, and we promote security and awareness for all IRS employees. Our employees, in fact, are our partners in ensuring security, workplace safety, and security. In this regard, we conduct periodic evacuation drills and shelter-in-place exercises which heighten employee emergency readiness. If you watched any of the coverage in Austin, you saw that among the things that went right down there, and some things did in fact go right, Mr. Chairman, our drills proved their worth. People did get out of the building on a timely basis, and we lost only one life. We also issue recurring communications regarding security and safety to reinforce processes and to raise awareness, including annual security awareness fairs that are held across the country. And we maintain an IRS intranet website that provides updated information on IRS physical security and emergency preparedness programs. From what I know today, Mr. Chairman, it's unlikely that there is anything we could have done to prevent the attack in Austin. Nonetheless, following that attack, we took a series of immediate steps to enhance our security posture, both in Austin and across the country, while we assess our long-term security needs and whether they have changed over time. This increased vigilance includes 24/7 guard service in all 11 IRS Austin offices. There's also additional security at IRS facilities across the country, including additional guard service at this time. In conclusion, this area remains a top concern for the IRS, and we will be taking a hard look at what we can do in both the short and long term to ensure the safety of our folks. Nothing is more important to Treasury Secretary Geithner, Commissioner Schulman, nor myself. Thanks, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Ms. Armstrong, you're now welcome to offer testimony for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lynch, Ranking Member Chaffetz, and Congresswoman. It's a pleasure to appear before you today to discuss...
Ms. Armstrong, could you pull that mic a little closer to you?
It's a pleasure to appear before you today to discuss the work of the Interagency Security Committee. The Interagency Security Committee was created as a direct result of the Oklahoma City bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in 1995, the worst domestic-based terrorist attack in U.S. history. The mission of the Interagency Security Committee is to develop standards, policies, and best practices for enhancing the quality and effectiveness of physical security in and the protection of the over 300,000 non-military federal facilities in the United States. The Department of Homeland Security's Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Protection chairs the Interagency Security Committee, which is composed of senior executives from 45 member departments and agencies that contribute to the publication of innovative products to increase the security of federal facilities, to protect federal employees and the visiting public. For example, in March 2008, the Interagency Security Committee developed and published the Facility Security Level Determinations for Federal Facilities, which defines criteria and processes facilities should use to determine their facility security level. In June 2009, per recommendation from the Government Accountability Office, the Interagency Security Committee developed the Use of Physical Security Performance Measures, the first federal policy guidance on performance measures for physical security programs and testing procedures. In addition, the Interagency Security Committee is currently in the final stages of a comprehensive multi-year effort to integrate 15 years of standards, lessons learned, and countermeasures for threats to federally owned and leased facilities. These documents will comprise the most comprehensive standards for federal facilities created to date. The Assistant Secretary for Infrastructure Protection also oversees the work of the Office of Infrastructure Protection, which conducts vulnerability assessments on the government facilities sector. These assessments identify security gaps and provide the foundation for risk-based implementation of protective programs. The Office of Infrastructure Protection also distributes the Infrastructure Protection Report Series, which provides protection information tailored to address issues faced by federal buildings, such as large government office buildings and federal courthouses. And my colleague from the Federal Protective Service will describe the department's role in protecting these facilities in greater detail. I appreciate the opportunity to address the committee on this important issue, and I look forward to answering any questions you might have.
Thank you. Mr. Schenkel, you're welcome to offer testimony for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lynch, Ranking Member Chaffetz, Congresswoman Norton. It is a pleasure to appear before you today to discuss the actions of the Federal Protective Service as the Federal Protective Service undertakes to ensure the safety and security of federal government buildings. The Federal Protective Service performs fixed post access control, screening functions, roving patrols at 9,000 General Service Administration owned and leased facilities. In fiscal year 2009, the Federal Protective Service responded to 35,812 calls for service, including 1,242 protests and organized disturbances, made 1,646 arrests, conducted 1,115 criminal investigations, processed 272 weapons violations, and prevented the introduction of 661,724 prohibited items into federal facilities, all with the significant assistance of our contract guards known as protective security officers. FPS was transferred at the start of the fiscal year to the National Protection and Programs Directorate, a component within DHS whose core mission is national resiliency that ranges from physical infrastructure protection to cybersecurity. While we are focused on ensuring a smooth transition of the organization, we believe this new structure will better position us within the department to receive the necessary support and meet our critical responsibilities moving forward. Primary among the Federal Protective Service's core mission requirements is a facility security assessment. The facility security assessment identifies existing and potential threats to federal facilities and their occupants. The Federal Protective Service takes an all-hazards approach to facility security assessment and evaluates the risks against possible mitigation measures built into our new risk assessment and management program. Those mitigating countermeasures are then presented to each facility security committee with recommendations on which countermeasures should be implemented, including the development of an occupant emergency plan. The Federal Protective Service systematically measures the effectiveness of our countermeasures through a variety of systematic programs, such as annual countermeasure effectiveness inventories, scheduled guard post and guard vendor inspections, and one of our most visible means, Operation Shield. Operation Shield conducts unannounced inspections to measure the effectiveness of contract guards in detecting the presence of unauthorized persons, potentially disruptive or dangerous activities in or around federal facilities, and the guard's ability to prevent the introduction of prohibitive items or harmful substances into those facilities. Operation Shield also serves as a visible, proactive, and random measure that may be used as a deterrent to disrupt the planning of terrorist activities. In addition, the Federal Protective Service routinely provides security awareness training for employees, which includes presentations on how to avoid becoming a victim of theft or violence. And we've also developed active shooter training, explaining what employees should do when faced with a violent situation and how to respond when law enforcement arrives. FPS has taken several actions and initiatives to address major areas identified by the Government Accountability Office, including human capital management, finance, guard contract oversight. FPS continues to develop additional information collection and analysis tools. FPS addressed the current GAO report regarding contract guard oversight and lapses in screening procedures by determining the cause of the lapses and recommending measures to prevent reoccurrence, increasing the frequency of guard posts and performance of protective security officers formerly referred to as contract security officers, requiring additional training in magnetometer and X-ray, including contract modification requiring the viewing of an FPS-produced training video that addresses screening for improvised explosive devices, ensuring that all protective security officers are compliant with certifications and qualifications as stated in contract by incorporating the certification system into our Risk Assessment Management Program, or RAMP, developing and initiating a 16-hour magnetometer X-ray training program provided to protective security officers by Federal Protective Service inspectors, titled the National Weapons Detection Program, which has begun in January 2010. As a result of the Covert Testing Working Group, FPS developed Covert Testing Program, which enhanced and complemented the ongoing efforts to improve oversight and improve the attentiveness and professionalism of the protective security officer. This current program further achieves FPS strategic goals of effectively and efficiently securing federal facilities and keeping their occupants safe. These are just some of the many ways the Federal Protective Service contributes to the safety and security of federal buildings and their occupants. I look forward to the opportunity to answer any questions you may have, and I thank you and the committee for holding this important hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Schenkel. Mr. Cottrell, welcome. You are now recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lynch, Congressman Chaffetz, and Congresswoman Norton. My name is Guy Cottrell, Deputy Chief Inspector for the United States Postal Inspection Service. I am pleased to be here with you today to discuss safety and security practices at the Postal Service. While I am a postal inspector, please note that in today's testimony I am providing information that reflects security strategies across many different functions within the Postal Service. I will begin with the inspection service. Our mission is to protect the Postal Service and its employees, secure the nation's mail system, and ensure public trust in the mail. Postal inspectors are federal law enforcement officers who carry firearms, make arrests, and serve federal search warrants and subpoenas. There are approximately 1,400 postal inspectors nationwide and abroad who enforce more than 200 federal laws involving the use of the U.S. mail and the postal system. The Inspection Service maintains a security force staffed by roughly 650 uniformed postal police officers who are assigned to critical postal facilities across the country. The officers provide perimeter security, escort high-value mail shipments, and perform essential protective functions. The Postal Service has a number of ways we provide security for our employees and buildings. The Postal Service has a cross-functional program to comprehensively review a building's security. The program helps postmasters and installation heads achieve and maintain compliance with policies governing all aspects of security. The review includes comprehensive on-site observations, document reviews, and interviews of facility personnel. At the conclusion of each assessment, a plan is developed to address any issues identified in that review. Emphasizing the key role that each employee plays in each other's safety is one of our prime strategies. Special emphasis has been placed on developing employee communications safety materials. For example, each week at facilities nationwide, managers are required to give safety stand-up talks. Simple tips to employees, such as reporting the condition of fences or public access to the workroom floor, all contribute to employee safety. We will shortly begin an educational campaign aimed specifically at our letter carriers. A major component of the Postal Service's workplace violence prevention program is the District Threat Assessment Team. Threat assessment teams use cross-functional team approaches to assess threatening situations and to develop risk abatement plans to minimize the potential risk of future violence. The Postal Service has established an agency-wide continuity program. The continuity program deals with issues that arise prior to, during, and after an event relative to the employee's safety and welfare. This program is tested and exercised on an annual basis. Our plan calls for the notification of all employees of a facility that an event has occurred and where each employee is to report. We have a toll-free number for all Postal Service employees to use in the event of an emergency to receive information about facility closings and operating status. We are updating a computer program which will identify critical postal facilities in the path of approaching storms, provide floodplain modeling and real-time storm updates, as well as estimate anticipated impacts on postal assets. The Inspection Service routinely works with other local and federal law enforcement agencies. We also participate in training exercises. This ensures that postal employees, equipment, and procedures are ready to manage an emergency without interrupting operations. The Inspection Service conducts and evaluates training on procedures for emergency management personnel and other essential staff. This promotes preparedness, improves response capabilities, assures that all systems are appropriate, and determines the effectiveness of our command, control, and communications processes. Thank you for the opportunity to testify about some of the Postal Service's initiatives on safety and security. I would be pleased to answer any questions the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Mr.